Hello, listeners. This is your co-host, Zoe, and I am here in the front of the show just to tell you a little bit about what you're going to hear today, which is our second episode ever that we recorded. And we've gone back and we have done a little bit of different editing on the sound to improve the sound quality. But sound editing is not the only important factor in recording. Certainly your equipment's an important factor, and also just your general audio recording techniques. And so our techniques were not quite where they are today. So the sound quality won't be what you're used to hearing today, like you're hearing right now, but it is better than when we first released it. So we really do hope that you can enjoy, because this episode, we really like it. We really like the content. It's a great memory for us. And so we really hope that you enjoy. I will be back again in the parlor to give you some updated news, as well as at the end, of course, to tell you what we're reading next. So happy listening. Hi, and welcome to Tea and Strumpets, a Regency romance review. I'm Zoe.
And I'm Kelsey.
And welcome to episode 2. We've made it. But before we get started discussing the book we read today, I have a question for you, Kelsey.
Okay, shoot.
What is your favorite part in a romance novel?
Okay, so for me, my favorite part in a romance novel is when the characters are meeting and they're interacting and you can just feel the sexual tension building. Like they're attracted to each other, they're getting to know each other, and they're just like, oh, what is this? What's happening? Like, I just feel like, and especially for the girl's virginal, she's like, what are these feelings? Like, I'm hot, I'm bothered, I don't understand. And then I just love it when it's like, oh, that build up makes me so happy.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the best parts of a romance novel, but it wouldn't be my favorite. Gosh, if I had to think about it, my favorite part of a romance novel honestly might be the happily ever after. Books that don't have epilogues make me really sad. Even if there's other books in the series, I feel like I am just racing towards that epilogue every time I'm reading them. And I know that's kind of a sad thing to think of. And it's not all about the happily ever after. Honestly, like the chase and the tension and all those things are really the rewarding part. But there's just like this kind of moment of wonderful relief when you get there, when you get the thing that you've been waiting for the whole novel. And that's the happily ever after for me. So I think that might be my favorite part. I'm not sure. It's so hard to pick just one.
I get it though. I'm with you though when they don't have an epilogue. I'm like, but I want to know just a little bit more. Like
it's like tying the bow on the top of the present, you know? You want it wrapped up like with a bow, not just wrapped up. So, I mean, that's just me. I also really love, my other toss up is like, I love it when, I don't know if it's my favorite part, but I love it when a romance novel surprises me with a character that makes me think about something differently or gives me new perspective on something. But I think we're going to have books that encompass that, and we can delve a lot more into that when we get there.
Super. All right. So what are we reading this week?
So the book that we're reading today is Like No Other Lover, which is the Pennyroyal Green series, book number 2 by Julianne Long. And last time I discussed a little bit about Julianne Long, and I said I was going to discuss a little bit each time. And so here today, what I want to talk about is her still active MySpace account. And it's not like I just Googled her and saw that she had a MySpace.
That's impressive.
It was after I read the first book. At the end of it, it was like how to get in touch with Julianne Long. And one of them was her MySpace, myspace.com/Julianne Long. So I, of course, had to look it up because MySpace.
Wow.
And so I'll be honest, there's not a whole lot there.
But the fact that it's not all just completely deleted with like one photo still left up there, because I think I technically still have a MySpace account despite numerous attempts to delete it.
There's definitely something broken, but like some of the images don't load, but she's connected to 3,000 people. And the last 2 notifications were in September 13th. 2013 at 4:46 p.m., she has a new profile image. So,
well, still, that was way after I had 100% switched to my Facebook.
Yeah. So anyhow, I just thought that was a fun fact that you can still find in the first book. And since we have, what is it now? We've got at least 8. We have 9 more books to go after this one.
Nice.
We will have plenty more to share about her. So we have both read this book before. But yes. Kelsey, what do you remember? What did you remember before you picked this book back up again for our podcast?
Okay, so what I remembered about it was Miles had gone out to this place. I've been pronouncing it as Le Cow. Is that correct? I don't know.
It's not correct. I also pronounced it Le Cow. So
perfect, as long as we're on the same page.
Yeah, but if anybody out there knows anything more, and I have a little bit more to talk about that as we get into the plot, but if anybody has some details on that, please reach out to us, romancepod@gmail.com.
Yes. And I knew he went to Le Cow and he had written this book that got pretty dang popular. And that was about all I had, to be honest. I remember liking it. I remember thinking it was sweet and cute, and I really enjoyed it. And I think I mentioned last time how I'm pretty sure this was the first book I read. And after reading it, I'm like 100% sure it was the first book I read, which makes sense about why I remembered almost nothing about it.
Yeah. So for me, I remembered that he was a sexy scientist with glasses and that he really loved her. And that was all I really remembered. I remembered she didn't have a lot of money. Like that detail, I believe, stuck with me. But I got really excited when we looked up which book we were reading, and it was this one. For some reason, we both thought it was going to be Chase's book, but I had forgotten this book. And I also had forgotten I really loved this book. So I was excited to read it again and excited to see after, because again, this was the second romance novel that I ever read. So I was excited to see if it held up. The last one didn't. So we get into this one. And shall we get started?
Let's do it. So our main characters are Miles Redmond and Cynthia Brightly, which I just really like her name. I think that's a good heroine name.
100%. I love it. And Cynthia, the name Cynthia does nothing for me in general. Sorry, Cynthia's out there. It's just, it wouldn't be a name that I would pick. But for whatever reason, Cynthia Brightly, everything about it is perfect. I love it.
So Miles has just come back from Lakoa. This is like a prologue, as it were. And he's at a ball. He's only been back a couple of weeks. He hasn't written his book yet. So he's not, people know him because he's been around in society, but he's not well known for his book. And
so wait, because I did look up Lakow because I was like, is Lakow a real place or is Lakow a fictional place? So what we know from the book is that Lakow is in South America and there's crazy, he's a scientist and there's crazy flora and fauna and cannibals and, you know, tribal native women. But what I've found so far is that you can purchase your very own Isla Lakow in Chile, South America right now for the price of $1.6 million US. So
that's pretty good. You get a whole island for 1.6 million. Up in the San Francisco Bay Area, you get like a 2-bedroom fixer-upper.
But I will say, looking at the picture, and this is very easily Googleable, looking at the picture, it's a tiny island. There is not much vegetation. I think I could walk from one side to the other in a matter of hours at most. So I don't believe that this is the Lakow that features in the book. I wondered if it was an older name that was now a name of something else, but I didn't really find anything on that. So again, if anybody has any more information, we'd love to know.
It could just be she picked a place because it sounded cool and she's like, there's not a lot of information. No one will know. I can make up whatever I want.
I think that works for her too, right? Pennyroyal Green is fictitious. So it doesn't surprise me if that's the route that she went to take.
Yeah, I totally thought it's fictitious. I didn't look it up. I just assumed and never bothered checking into it.
Well, like I said, it's been a while since I've read this book. I've read it more than once, I believe. And third time around, I decided to finally look.
Okay, so back at the ball, Miles is hanging out, and then he catches this color blue out of the corner of his eye, and he talks about these giant butterflies that he sees in Lacau, and it reminds him of that blue, just reminds him of a butterfly. So he turns his head expecting a butterfly, and instead he gazes upon our heroine, Cynthia Brightly. Now, he kind of follows her around, wants to know who she is. And as he gets closer to her, he hears her having a conversation with a friend. And the conversation's not great because he basically hears her say, "Oh, I'm not going after Miles Redmond. I'll go after Lion Redmond because he's the heir. But like, I'm not taking a second son.
Yeah, and I think it's even like, I think she even says something else about him, like, oh, bugs and stuff? No way. And it's very vapid, and it's obviously something that's not meant to be overheard, but he does overhear it.
So he overhears it, and then he never approaches her again, and he writes her off, and he's like, well, she was beautiful, but obviously that beauty does not go underneath the skin.
But before he walks away, before he actually hears her even say any of that, he is a scientist, so he wants to find out a little bit about her. And he asks someone as nonchalantly as he can about her. And the guy does this whole spiel about her. He says something, at the end, it's like, Miss Brightly has no fortune and no family, one hears, but she has everything else, as you can see, and it is quite fashionable to be in love with her. So this phenomenon had already been discovered. The scientist in Miles was displeased.
I love that. That's a great line. I forgot about that one.
I just loved that line. And that's his first impression of her, right? That he thinks she's this phenomenon, but someone else has already discovered her. He's not the first to discover her. And I just thought that was such a good intro to who he is too.
Yeah, so he writes her off, and then we get into our main story, which is taking place a year later, and the Redmonds are hosting a house party. And his sister Violet has just come home from London, and who should she bring along with her but Cynthia Brightly? So Violet has a reputation for causing trouble, and so the parents immediately assume that she's brought Cynthia Brightly to cause trouble because Cynthia has left London in disgrace. She has been burned by everybody because she was engaged, and now the engagement is off and no one knows why. There's some rumor about a duel, but no one really knows, and everyone's just completely burned her.
And she's kind of desolate at this point. We as a reader know that about her, but nobody else in society, because she's always kind of been this enigma, knows about this desolation, and her straits are quite dire. She's waiting for a letter. She's heard through the grapevine that there is a Mrs. Mundy Dickinson, or in Northumberland, I believe,
yes,
who is in a bath chair and is looking for a companion. And so she has very little money left to her name. She has written to this woman who has a reputation for being difficult to hopefully be her new companion. And so while she's at this house party, she is waiting desperately and hoping that a letter arrives from Mrs. Mundy Dickinson so that she actually has somewhere to go after the party.
She's also using the party as one last ditch effort to get married. She's like, well, I have this backup option, but if some dude wants to marry me at this party, I'll take it.
Absolutely.
So Miles sees her, and he remembers this dismissal quite vividly. And so he already is kind of like, oh, this is going to be a problem. We better fix this. And on top of that, his dad, Isaiah Redmond, has now pulled him into the office and talked to him about marriage. Specifically, he would like Miles to marry a family friend's daughter, Georgina. Now, in this conversation, his father's also saying that his mother and him are going to be leaving for a bit because they have to go do some business somewhere else. And
Convenient,
yeah. So now this house party is not supervised. It's not supervised for the people in the late 20s.
Yeah. It's under Miles' supervision, which he is very dependable. That is one of his characteristics, but
Yeah, so to sweeten the deal about why he should marry Georgina is he's saying that maybe if he marries Georgina, his father might be able to put in a good word and get Miles funding to go back to Lacau.
Which is Miles's absolute dream. That is what's driving Miles. He wants to go back. He's been there once. He saw so much, and it is his life's work. He wants to write more books and see more things and discover more and see more. He's just inquisitive by nature, and he can't wait to get back. And he just doesn't have the funding. So this is quite nice. His dad asks, is love important to you? And he's like, no. And so then his dad says, okay, well, there's this nice girl who and she's pretty. And, if you marry her, you can basically have everything you want. So
that's pretty good. He also makes a point to warn Miles against Cynthia Brightly and to really he's like, keep an eye on her. And then when she's like, this party's done, she better be out of here. Like, this girl is bad news and we don't really want to associate with her.
So this is the second book here. And in the first book, we got a little snippet of Violet Redmond. And the tiny snippet we got of her is, I think, a couple of lines where it basically insinuates that she is a troublemaker. And so her dad, also not being home, says, like, watch out for this girl that Violet brought back, Cynthia. I don't know anything about her. There's some rumors. And Violet, she likes to cause trouble, so she probably brought this girl for a reason. So that's kind of his motivation, I think, for informing Miles. Less to warn Miles than to warn Violet, to make sure Miles knew what Violet's up to.
Yes. So Miles is pretty sure that the only reason why Cynthia is there is to marry. And he wants to make it perfectly clear that just because he's the heir apparent, since Lion is not here, so now he's the heir apparent. So now he looks better towards her. And he's like, I have a feeling this girl is going to try to get married again. I'm sure she's going to set her sights on me. And I'm just going to let her down right now. Like, she better not even try it because I know that she doesn't actually like me.
And up until their first conversation, because they don't really have a conversation the first couple of times that they see each other in the book, he is absolutely cold and rude to her. He gets up and leaves. He bows and says, I have to leave, and just leaves.
Yeah.
So she is like, what is up with this guy?
So Miles has some things for this house. He has an agenda for this house party. He's going to ingratiate himself to Georgina. He's going to keep an eye on Violet. He's going to steer Cynthia away from him, and he's going to have a fling with a married lady because he apparently has this reputation, a secret reputation. So he's not a rake as an overt rake like Colin was in our last book. Miles is apparently a secret rake where all the widows, because he usually goes for widows, not married ladies, all the widows know that he's a good lay. And so this has circled around. And so this married lady, she's unhappy in her marriage. And she's purely there. She made up some excuse about why she got to go to the house party and she's not with her husband. And she's not covertly telling this to Miles to be like, hey boy, hey, I hear we should do something.
Yeah, it's a busy party for a guy. Now, all of a sudden, he's also the host de facto. So it's going to be a busy 2 weeks.
Yes. So in his effort to kind of tell Cynthia that he's not interested, he kind of steals her away for a conversation and is like, look, you're probably here to find a guy. I'm not that guy. Don't even try it. And she's a little taken aback by it. And then she's like, well, okay, fine. But what about the other guys here? What do you know about them? And he decides, very spur of the moment, this isn't normally his type of persona. He's like, I'll give you all the information you need to know, but you have to give me a kiss. And Cynthia is very desperate. So she's like, okay, fine. If that's what I got to do, I'll do it because I really want to get married. I really don't want to have to be a companion to this nasty lady in Northumberland. That's my fallback.
I think, too, the tension in this scene between the two of them is
super felt by the reader. You can tell that they have like sparks flying off the two of them. He's done something totally out of his character by pulling her away, and she is sparring with him verbally and not being the thing that he expects. And so between the two of them, there's just this kind of tension that's building. And all of a sudden he does something so unexpected of asking her for this kiss. And I think she wouldn't normally trade a kiss for something. It doesn't seem her character, but at the same time, she's like feeling the tension and kind of can't say no, but also really needs it. So there's this desperation plus tension that adds something really complex to it that I liked.
I would agree. And I would also say that this is a really pivotal moment in the book because him being really brutally honest with her up front and then her kind of dropping the mask of like, I want to be charming, and her just dropping it and being like, well, you're rude, you know, is really big because it means that they don't have masks with each other. It's like from this point on, they're going to be pretty open with each other. And that is huge throughout the whole thing.
I completely agree. When we get to talking about the characters and the writing later on, I have some notes about that because there are quite a few times in this book where information is outright told so that bad things don't happen. So it basically takes away a lot of those moments where if a character had known that piece of information, a thing wouldn't have happened. And it's unexpected, it's refreshing, and I really liked it.
I really like it too. I always really like it when the characters are honest with each other because then it's not a misadventure based on dishonesty or like withholding information. It's an adventure based on like mutual collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so they sneak out of the room and like they share their secret kiss, making sure no one knows. And when they kiss, she's like, okay, fine, kiss. I've kissed guys before. It's whatever. And this kiss though, it starts a fire. She is completely taken aback. He's taken aback. And the two of them are like, okay, whoa. We really shouldn't do that again because there's something there that we both are not interested in exploring at the moment.
And then after that, he does something else very much, well, out of character. So he starts to help her narrow down the matches, but he tells her one of the guys really likes dogs. And so she has a lot of conversations about dogs. And there's this whole thing of which dog should she have for her. And anyhow, because of that, she reveals to him that she's never had a pet. And the next morning, she wakes up to a kitten brought to her room.
Which I honestly think is the most adorable thing because she really opens up and she's like, look, I don't have parents. Like, I'm really all alone. And no, I've never had a dog before. I don't even know if I like dogs, but I like the idea of not being alone. And Miles is like, he really can't. Miles doesn't even know why he does the things. He just really has this firm, like, dislike of her feeling alone. So he like goes to the barn and finds a kitten for her. Like,
it's so cute. It's just, it's heartbreaking. And I remember reading it and she was so mad at him. Like, how dare he have the right? And then the kitten like puts a paw on her nose and she just like, is lost.
She melts. She's like, how dare he like get me this? What am I going to do with this? I don't want this. And then the kitten's just like, hello. And she's like, oh my God, I love you.
And it's not even just and I don't want this. It was how dare he assume that, you know, I don't have something to love and this. Yeah. It was deeper and it was wonderful. And one thing we didn't mention is that in the beginning, her room that she was put into was a kind of a second rate guest room. It wasn't the nicest of the nice. A front, shall we say, from Mrs. Redmond. But in the corner of the windowsill, there was a little spider when she got there.
Yes.
And she ends up naming the spider Susan. She ends up naming the kitten Spider. It's very cute. There's some other bug-related things as they go on that connect to Miles, and Miles talking about spiders and how, you know, when their webs get destroyed, they just put it back together again. And there's the symbolism between Cynthia's life of kind of difficulty and overcoming. And that's her job. She just puts it back together again. And it was just, oh God,
yes,
it was so heart-wrenching.
It was. I really loved that symbolism and really how she's like, I am the spider. Like, I just get up and I do it again. And, you know, Miles talks about spiders in a way where she didn't ever think about it. You know, he was remarking about how wonderful they are and what incredible builders and how resilient they were. And so then, you know, she kind of has a different opinion of the spider in her room. And so then every night when she comes in, she like checks to make sure the spider's still there and that the maid hasn't, you know, discovered it and torn the web down. She's very much invested in Susan, like in the well-being of Susan. And then she has Spider on top of it that she plays with.
It's so cute. Yeah, no, I'm super into it. So then I think after kind of all those things, I'm sorry, I got us off track, but kittens and spiders, but there's a shooting party to impress another guy.
Yeah, so there's a shooting party because one of the guys that she's been talking to who likes dogs, he's really into dogs and hunting. And so she's like, yeah, totally. So he organizes a shooting party because she very clearly never says she hasn't gone hunting before, but she never actually says she's gone hunting before. So she's like, yeah, like hunting, you know, just sounds like it's just a great form of exercise. And he's like, oh, great, she shoots. So she's handed a rifle, or is it a rifle or shotgun? One of those. A musket.
I think it might be a musket.
It's a musket. This is old times. Anyway, so she's handed a musket and they're like, well, you know how to use this. She's like, well, fake it till you make it, girl. And she is also a very kind person. And this is what Miles is discovering, because when she's talking to the guy about the dogs, you know, she mentions to Miles that if there's any dogs on the property, this guy might really like to have a dog for the weekend because he really loves his dogs. And he would just probably appreciate having one around. So Miles does have a dog brought over to the shooting party, and the guy loves the dog. But unfortunately, the dog, while Cynthia's trying to fake her way through target shooting, the dog does what dogs do, which is, you know, he starts sniffing at her butt, and she's like, whoa! So she gets thrown off. She shoots the musket, and it takes off the penis of the David statue that's in the yard. And then that flying object, as it got shot off, hurtles towards one of the other men there that she's trying to catch the eye of and nearly takes him out.
It's so brilliant. I mean, normally I don't like penis humor, but it's so funny. She does such a good job. The whole scene is just brilliant. It definitely feels very slapsticky, you know, like, oh, dog, you know, sniffing the butt.
Yeah.
Oh, penis statue. But it works so well.
It really does.
You gotta read it.
No, it's great. And it's just one of those things, because basically, like, she's trying really hard and she's making headway, but like things just kind of go cattywampus.
But after that shooting party, everything adjourns inside. And they're doing some card games that evening, and Miles is getting to know Georgina, and Cynthia, who is trying very hard to be good, keeps overhearing something that is happening between Miles and Georgina. And this is truly one of my favorite parts of the book.
This is literally my favorite part. It was the first thing I highlighted.
This is just brilliant.
She's like, be good, Cynthia, be good, don't do it. But she's listening to Miles and Georgina, and she's kind of miffed because she's really liking Miles. And she understands that, like, he's having the conversation with Georgina, but she really doesn't like the fact that he keeps talking to Georgina. And so they're sitting around playing a card game, and I believe there's 4 of them. One of which is Lady Windermere, who's an older lady and was mainly there for Violet's and Miles's mother, but she's gone, so she's just like, why am I here? And she's a terrible chaperone, by the way, because what Cynthia does is she's like, guys, listen to what Georgina is saying. So Georgina, every time Miles says something, she goes, oh, Mr. Redmond, that's so interesting. And Cynthia keeps hearing this. And so she's like, guys, do you hear what's going on over there? And all the other people are there like, what are you talking about? She's like, oh, Mr. Redmond, it's so interesting. And they don't believe her at first. And then all of a sudden they pick up on it and it starts happening more. And so then Cynthia proposes they turn this into a drinking game.
A girl after my own heart.
I know.
It's so mean. Like, it's so mean, but it's so funny.
It's so
and
funny.
I'm sure I've done something like this in my life, and I'm not proud of it, but oh gosh.
So I have the perfect example. So the Twilight movies.
Yeah.
My friends and I, we read the books, you know, but when the movies came out, we were older. We kind of understood that like the stories weren't that great, you know? And so we decided that we really wanted to go watch these movies in theaters, but we turned it into a drinking game. So we smuggled some alcohol in and we 100% turned Twilight into a drinking game. And we made up rules similar to like what Cynthia's doing now. And it was a great time. However, when Cynthia is explaining the rules, this is what I highlighted because it's hilarious. Violet very innocently says, "Who wins the game?" "The last person upright," Lady Windermere said with relish.
It's so true. And that is like the definition of a drinking game, right?
Yeah, right? And I just love it because it's the old lady who's like really into it. And she's like, "Who's ever left standing, that's who wins the game."
And it's the scene unfolds so naturally. You know, Miles and Georgina are having their conversation. He's kind of not paying attention, but then he sort of starts to notice that the four of them, so it's Violet, Cynthia, Lady Windermere, and Mr. Goodkind, who almost got taken out by that penis statue from earlier in the day. And he's normally very uptight. He's very by the book. And in fact, he's writing a book on etiquette and how to be chaste, I believe, for young people.
Yeah, he's kind of a pompous ass.
He's definitely a pompous ass, but he decides to let go a little bit this evening, probably in part to some of the things that Cynthia charmingly said to him earlier. And so the four of them are getting drunker and drunker. And so as they get drunker, it's kind of hard not to notice them. So Miles starts to notice something's going on. He sees the footman going back and forth a bunch of times. And then he also sees them like get hushed for a minute and then go, wait, does that count? Because Georgina said something like, "Oh, how interesting." Yeah. Instead of the whole spiel. Yeah. And that's when he gets up.
That's when he goes over and he's like, "So what's going on?" And then he realizes his sister is like, she's done. Like,
she is 3 sheets to the wind.
Oh, she's gone. Like, and he's like, "What is happening?" And everyone else is also really drunk. And he looks at Cynthia and she's like, innocent eyes. She's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he's like, "What's happening?" And then he hears about the game. And
Violet tells all. Violet tells all.
Drunk Violet is drunk Kelsey. She's just gonna spill everything.
Oh, it kind of sounds like drunk Zoe. Oh, goodness. Yeah, that part is just such a great part in the book. I love it. I remembered that scene. I don't know if I remembered that it was in this book particularly, but it's definitely a scene that has stuck with me throughout all my reading. Yes.
This also leads us very nicely into another interaction between Miles and Cynthia, because afterwards after he puts Violet to bed and very lovingly puts the chamber pot next to her bed, he goes looking for Cynthia and he finds her in a library and she's doing something and he thinks she's crying, and he goes up and he realizes that what she's doing is she's lighting a churro, which is basically a cigarette. It's like a short cigar. And this prompts a conversation, and that conversation makes a makeout session happen. Some good stuff.
It's a steamy session. They're kind of angry at each other. There's this total tension and frustration, and things get out of hand fast. Her dress top comes off, and she realizes that she is kind of lost to this, and he is the one who stops it. And I believe he says at this point, he says, "There's more, Cynthia, there's more." But she isn't really, she realizes that no, she can't do this thing with him. Yes. She doesn't want to be a mistress. It's never said in the beginning. It's never said, but that's not the kind of desperation she sees herself going to. She sees herself being the companion to a temperamental woman in a bath chair in Northumberland versus someone's mistress.
So this happens, and then she really like renews her efforts, and she's like, I have to stay away from Miles. I have to really like get going with the guys at this party. So one of the other guys at the party, he's a lord of some kind. Maybe you know better than I do.
Lord Argosy? That's really all I remember. He's the heir to an earldom, probably.
Sounds right. And so Lord Argosy, he's young, he's good looking, you know, and she's been kind of going after the older guys that would be more interested in having her attention because she doesn't know if they'll play out with the young guy. But she's getting somewhere, and she finds out that he's very much interested in the supernatural. And so she suggests, or she kind of gets him to suggest, that they go see the gypsies that are encamped nearby and get their fortunes told. So this is a very interesting scene because there's some of this that plays out later in the other books because the daughter of the woman who's telling the fortune, she's apparently got a little bit of the sight, but she's not trained yet. So while the older woman is reading their palms and is trying to get information, all of a sudden the daughter just starts yelling weird shit.
Yep.
And so we get to hear, LeVay, 10 kids, so much blood.
I totally remember LeVay. I'm pretty sure I remember 10 kids.
Yeah.
I don't remember so much blood. Who is that in reference to?
So that's in reference to Cynthia. So that's referencing that secret past of that scandalousness that she left London for. So that's why she talks about there's so much blood and like the heartbreak. So
got it. I remember now. Sorry.
So this is kind of takes him aback. He's a little unsure. It sets Lord Argosy aback because he really likes Cynthia, but she now is like, oh man, I've got to do some like damage control that I need to make sure he knows that like I'm a good person. So she doesn't want to burn the other bridges because she's not sure.
Side note.
Okay.
Breaking in here because I just wanted to say the LeVay thing, and it's going to be a couple more books, but man, that really stuck with me. It was so good. I got so excited when LeVay came back around. I was like, what? And then there were some more twists and turns, and anyhow, that was a good one.
It was a good one. So after they return from the gypsies, she sees Miles, and Miles is still kind of smarting with her about this whole drinking game thing. So he tells her about one of the guys at the party, which is Goodkind, because while she has been trying to get close to Lord Argosy by going to the gypsies, she's not 100% sure about him. And the negative comments made at the gypsies, she was worried about Argosy getting scared away. So she's like, okay, I don't want to burn the Goodkind bridge. And Miles, still mad at her about the drinking game, tells her that Goodkind, he has an unusual peccadillo. And he tells her that Goodkind likes to cross-dress in his spare time at home. And Cynthia, being a good, kind person, isn't really super fazed about it. She's like, okay, like this is kind of different. I wasn't expecting this, but I can be supportive. I don't mind. And so this comes into play later. But at the same time, Cynthia also learns that Miles is trying to marry Georgina. And that information kind of bothers her. She's not going to say it bothers her because she has no right to, but it does bother her.
Yeah, and this is one of those moments when I think the book kind of does something unexpected where it's no longer just implied that Miles and Georgina are courting, but he outright tells her, I am marrying Georgina because it will fund my expedition to Lacau. Like there's no bones about it. And so the characters can react honestly to the actual stuff that's happening. So I really liked that.
Yes. And this is not common knowledge, like that he's marrying Georgina. And there's a really great quote that's going to come up in just a bit that I want to share. But anyway, so they have this conversation about Goodkind and Georgina, and then they all, go to bed, and then they wake up the next morning, and Violet is gone. Violet is completely gone. And they can't figure out where she is. And then Miles goes to Cynthia because he's like, Cynthia's a troublemaker. I knew she was going to instigate something with Violet. I'm going to ask her. And then Cynthia, being Cynthia, she's like, well, I may have implied that if she really liked the gypsy boy, she should like go hang out with the gypsies. And the gypsies, they all know, are leaving town that day. So Miles hightails it over to the gypsy camp to find Violet. And there's this really great moment between Violet and Miles where you just see how a wonderful, protective older brother he is. And you get to know a little bit more about Violet. And they have this heart-to-heart about her really missing Lion and not wanting Miles to go back to Lacau, but her knowing that he would always return to her. And then they also talk about how he's gonna marry Georgina. And Violet's like, I like Georgina, she's cool. But in this conversation, Miles comes to a realization because they talk about Cynthia a little bit, just in passing, not any sort of romantic thing. And here's the quote. He felt again that peculiar pierce in the vicinity of his breastbone, that familiar restlessness. Who looked after Cynthia Brightly? Cynthia Brightly. He didn't think she was fearless, and this is what made her courageous. And I love this line.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Because I think it's just so beautiful and about her and how he really just admires, her courage and how she, is resilient like her little spider friend Susan.
And it's him coming to the realization that that's the thing that he admires about her. It's really sweet. And the whole interaction between him and Violet is wonderful because you get to know Violet. Like, she seems on the surface like this troublemaker, kind of spoiled child who does whatever she wants for effect. But in this conversation, you really realize that she has depths and that she is bored and she's sad. She's sad and she's bored. And that's really a hard thing. And then Miles does other great big brother things, like she came there on a cart that she hitchhiked basically, and he makes her walk home while he rides his horse home.
That's great.
So
I love that part.
Think about it. It's so great. And also, kind of to Miles's credit, before he leaves, before he goes to grab Violet, when Cynthia's confessing to him about her kind of goading Violet very gently into doing something, maybe not making the best decision, Miles says something that is kind of condescending, but really not. He says to her, but we have a responsibility to be better because we see more. So he's reprimanding her for being foolish by also trying to make her better, because he realizes that she is the kind of person who sees more in people, that she's very observant, she's very emotionally aware. And so because of that, because of those characteristics, she has to be better, not worse.
And it also plays off like that Miles, he, as a scientist, he sits and observes, and he can see that in Cynthia, that she has a way with people because she is also very observant like he is. So it's very poignant moment between the two of them. And so when Violet returns, things are kind of moving along. And then Miles, in his like frustrated, I can't have Cynthia, but I need to do something rage, like really makes a play at Lady Middleton, who's the wife who wants to get in bed with him. And Cynthia, being the observant one we just talked about, overhears this and is like, oh, I see what's happening here. So she sneaks downstairs when this thing is supposed to take place and is waiting outside his bedchamber, and Miles catches her out there.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like, is she waiting? She's not even waiting. She just decides to like walk by. And it's so sweet, like her internal monologue, because it's like, I'm going to see if it actually happens. And she's trying to convince herself, but that's not it. She's going to stop it. Like, she does not want this thing to happen. So she's simply walking the hall.
Yeah.
And he, I think, hears her and opens the door thinking that it's Lady Middleton.
And there's this cute where he like pulls her into the room, throws her back out of the room, pulls her back into the room. And then he sends Lady Middleton away when she does come, because she does come. She's been after it. It's been days. Like, she's about to go home. Like, it's been days. Anyway, so this leads to a very interesting encounter between Cynthia and Miles, because they just really can't leave each other alone. That first kiss just set the stage, and they just can't handle it when they're in close quarters like this together.
Yeah, and so he puts her on his lap and he says, I'm going to show you more. And he gives her an orgasm and it's wonderful. And then he's like, okay, time for you to go. And this is again where I think that the book does something unexpected, because our virginal Cynthia decides that, no, I'm not going to let you say no. You have to trust me. And so she gives him a hand job, which is, it seemed like very wonderful for him.
Yeah.
And monumental, one might say.
Yeah.
And I really had this like, yeah, girl moment where it was like, normally a lot of the time in these encounters, the man kind of has all the power, right? Especially this time period, they had the power because they knew things, and women specifically didn't know things. So in these books, when these virginal women meet these rakes, they don't know anything. But Cynthia's like, show me how to do it. Show me what you need. Show me what I can do, because she wants to reciprocate. And it's a really sweet, steamy moment.
Yep. Oh, indeed. And of course, what do they decide afterwards? It can't happen again.
Yeah. And the next day, all hell breaks loose because she decides to approach Mr. Goodkind and mention that she would be totally fine if he wanted to borrow some of her garters. And she's really good at sewing, so she could make big ones should he need some of those. And he just has an absolute meltdown and immediately packs his things and leaves. And she is so mad. She's so mad and immediately goes and yells at Miles, which again, kind of unexpected from this book, right? She goes and she confronts him immediately and confronts him by telling him, this isn't a game for me. This is my life and you can't play with it like that. You have all this power. You're a man, you have money, you have family. I have nothing and no one. And it isn't a game and I'm depending on this. And she goes even further to explain exactly what happened in London, which wasn't much of a revelation for me as a reader. You know, there was a duel and then she got burned. And that's really what happened.
Yes. Well, and the reason why the duel took place is because she, as Miles has seen, she's very observant and she was just enjoying having attention in London. And so she kind of was like playing guys off each other. And she was like, and I was unstoppable until like I pushed it too far. And I'm so mad at myself for doing that. But like it happened. And
yeah. And she really regrets it all. Obviously, she sees where she's at. She realizes that she should have done better, but she couldn't have stopped herself. It reminded me a lot of like child stars, you know, how they get all this fame all of a sudden and there's all this money and opulence and crazy attention and they often fall from it, like, you know, Lindsay Lohan or Amanda Bynes or even like things Justin Bieber's done, right? They don't know how to handle all of these things coming at them. And that's what happened to Cynthia. She was just a vicar's adopted daughter. And then she had a friend who invited her to London. She had enough money for one season of dresses. And she was all of a sudden the toast of the town. And it was the most incredible feeling for someone who'd had no one and nothing to have everything and have everyone want her. So she kind of got drunk by it. And she realizes, obviously, that didn't serve her well, but she couldn't stop herself in the moment. In fact, even in this moment, Miles says something and Cynthia realizes that Miles heard her at that ball back when he had first seen her. She remembered what she had said, but she hadn't seen him. She wasn't introduced to him, so she didn't remember him, but she remembered saying it. And a comment that he makes her realize that he had heard that. And she's, you know, honestly sorry. There isn't this contrived, you know, scene of, oh, I'm so sorry. It really is this really deep sadness that she realizes. And he understands. There's really like, it's just a beautiful moment where kind of, again,
it is.
Both of them come to terms with it.
Yeah. And when she apologizes, you know, she apologizes, but she also very clearly states like, you know why I said it though. like, you understand now, like, why I would say something like that, because I didn't know you, and I do apologize because you shouldn't have heard that. But at the same time, too, like, just very honest about why, you know, she would say something like that.
Yeah, now we're getting into the home stretch of the book. Now that we've gotten to here, it kind of is getting towards the conclusion. We've learned a lot about our characters, and the house party is starting to wrap up. But the irony, of course, is that Lady Georgina then comes to Cynthia shortly after all of this to ask for flirting lessons because she doesn't know how to flirt with Miles. And she tells Cynthia that she's been in love with him since she was a little girl, but she doesn't like spiders. She doesn't like bugs. She thinks they're gross. Even though she's learned all about them, she doesn't care at all. And Cynthia has this kind of moment of like, oh goodness, like this is heartbreaking for her because she realizes that Lady Georgina really isn't suited for Miles, but in a way that's not actually that typical.
Like you said, she's heartbroken for Miles, but she really encourages Lady Georgina. She's like, you need to understand why it is he likes these things. Like, even if you don't like it, that's fine, but you need to understand why he likes it, and then maybe you will be able to like it as well.
So then after that, she kind of leaves it at that. She really just tells Georgina that you have to understand why they like these things, and you have to use those things to your advantage. You have to be excited about it too, and you have to like it because they like it, you know, like normal human being things. But regardless, from there, Cynthia and Miles have come to this agreement that they are not for each other, and he's going to help her after the debacle with Goodkind. He's really going to help her. He says, which guy do you want? Do you want Millthorpe or Middlethorpe?
Middlethorpe, I think.
Middleton and Middlethorpe? I think it might be just
Yeah.
Okay. Well, regardless, do you want the guy with the dog or do you want the young, handsome one? And she decides the young, handsome one would be better. And Miles does everything in his power, and Argosy is going to propose by everyone's account. Reckoning. They believe that that's going to happen. And kind of the last night of the house party, Argosy goes with Jonathan Redmond, the youngest Redmond, to the Pig and Thistle in Pennyroyal Green to a darts tournament. And he
comes back very upset
because he has heard that Cynthia is a strumpet, shall we say?
Yeah.
And that she's kissed a ton of men, and he feels heartbroken because he really fancied himself in love with her.
Not only kissed a bunch of men, he heard that she was like sleeping with all the guys in the ton. Like, she was just like going through guys like nobody's business while she was there. And
the duels and the this and the that. There's just nothing good to be said about her. And he's actually very upset. He's not, he thought he was in love with her, and he probably loved her as much as anyone, or as he could love anyone, Miles thinks. But
so he comes back and he's saying all these things because Miles is like, I need to go. I told her I was going to help, and I need to go figure out, you know, what's going on. And so he goes to try to help and talk with Argosy about it. And then Argosy is going on and saying and repeating all the things and really believing them. And Miles loses it. And this is not a guy that loses it. Like, he just straight up punched Argosy in the face.
In the middle of the drawing room with a whole bunch of people.
In the middle of everything.
So then he goes up to his father's office and tells Argosy to come up there. And Miles is mortified. He's mortified at himself. He's mortified at his behavior. He's mortified for Cynthia because he realizes this is what has followed her, right? Guys who duel. And now a duel is about to happen. And so Argosy comes in basically shouting, name your second. And Miles is like, I was an ass. I'm so sorry. And again, this is another point where the book kind of takes a turn I didn't expect, right? Normally it's like, weapons, duels. But instead he's like, I was an absolute ass. Cynthia Brightly is like another sister to me. And I just couldn't take any words against her. She has the complete backing of the Redmond family. And
which is not 100% true, but that's okay.
Yeah, but he just lies as hard as he can because he wants to make it right for her. And he does. They make up.
And Miles and Cynthia, he goes and tells her, and they have this really wonderful moment of basically where they say goodbye to each other. And they say, okay, we're going to go our separate paths. You're going to marry Georgina. I'm going to marry Argus. Like, you know, if you fix it with Argosy, I'll marry him. And Violet comes along after Miles leaves, and she kind of spills that Argosy is planning to propose to her the next day. And she's like, great, this is what I want. Like, I'm going to marry this dude. It's going to be great. And when she gets to her room, she finds out a letter has arrived from Northumberland. And so then there's some internal things that we're not, as the reader, seeing. But this does lead her going to Miles's room that night.
Yeah, she goes to his room and they have sex and it's steamy. And I think at that point, Miles, there really aren't any words exchanged. But I think at that point, Miles is like, okay, I'm going to throw my life away for this because he can't deny it any longer. That's what I, as the reader, inferred. But
yes, and I agree. Like, he couldn't walk away from her that time. He couldn't even pretend.
But he doesn't have the chance to prove that what we thought was right happened, because when he wakes up the next morning, she's gone. And not only has she left Argosy, but she's just left.
Yes, she left a note for Argosy, said, I'm sorry, and like she just vanishes. And Miles freaks. Absolutely
freaks, loses his mind, is falling apart at the seams. And Violet, he has an interaction with Violet because now, you know, when Violet was gone, he went to Cynthia. And when Cynthia's gone, he goes to Violet. And it's a really sweet scene where she kind of realizes, and she's just like, Cynthia? And it's really this very cute thing where she realizes that they were in love. And so she mentions the Miss Mundy Dickinson in Northumberland. But before he goes, and again, yeah, this is another moment where the book to me takes a turn. Like, you think he's going to go scampering off and then come back and tell his family, look at my new wife. No, that is not his style. He's like, I am going to, you know, cross my T's and dot my I's. And so he goes, and his mother and father have returned by now, and he goes and tells his father what's happening.
Yeah, and he was very much like, look, I'm going to marry her no matter what. And I understand this means no money, and I don't care what you think about it, but like, you will treat her kindly. And Isaiah Redman is really impressed with Miles and impressed that his way of presenting it. And he's like, okay, that's fine. You will never see a dime from me ever again, but you will not be shut out from the family. And Miles is like, that's okay. And so he rides to Northumberland.
Yep. And he proposes in the foyer of Mrs. Mundy Dickinson's house. And it's very cute. And, you know, Cynthia says, what about Lacau? And he replies with, you are my dream, Cynthia. And it is very sweet and wonderful. And yeah. And then there's no epilogue.
I know. No epilogue. But
yeah,
as we can say, this is a very lovely ending. And Zoe, now that we've concluded our book, shall we adjourn to the parlor?
Let's go.
Hello again. I am here to give you our parlor updates today. And the first thing I want to talk about is the Love and Devotion author event. Event, you say? Now, most events have been canceled because right now, current events are that we are kind of in the beginning of COVID-19 and the world is responding to that. So there really aren't a lot of events, but the Love and Devotion author event isn't happening till May, so we're not 100% sure what the status of that event is. And irrespective of that, they have some interesting news to share that doesn't relate to the event, but does relate to an anthology that they are publishing. And this is the first book published under the Love and Devotion Author Services Inc. So very exciting that they are starting that new endeavor, and we definitely want to support them. So I wanted to tell you about this anthology that they are publishing, and it is available for pre-order this week. And the anthology is called Storybook Pub, and it is a contemporary anthology, but it is a mixed subgenre, and it is 21 stories from 21 authors. And the cover reveal is St. Patrick's Day, so that was 2 days ago. So you can go ahead and go look at the cover and check out all of the authors that are involved and maybe click that pre-order button. So to learn more about this Storybook Pub anthology, you can head over to bit.ly/devotion anthology. And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes. And Kelsey and I both really wanted to say to all of our listeners that we, of course, hope you are all staying safe and healthy right now. And we wish you and your families all continued health in this weird time. So be smart, be safe, happy reading, and happy listening. And in this time of, maybe self-quarantine, social distancing, or just isolation, podcasts can be a really great friend. So if you like what we're making, we recommend that you share it with a friend who you think could use a little happily ever after right now. And you can share our website, you can share our socials, or you can just share direct links to the episode, whatever you think that will be the best gateway for them. So our socials are at T as in Tom, N as in Nancy, Strumpets on Instagram and Twitter, /T and Strumpets on Facebook and Pinterest. And you can find us by searching our name on YouTube. Our email is romancepod@gmail.com, and our website is romancepod.com. And we'd love to hear from you all, especially right now. Tell us what you're reading, what you're doing. We love hearing from our listeners, so don't be shy. And also, I have just a recommendation right now. I wanted to share with you all my favorite podcast right now. And my favorite podcast is not a romance-based podcast, but the podcast that brings me the most joy at this time is called Dungeons and Daddies. And I started listening to Dungeons and Dragons podcasts before I ever played, and I find them really fun especially when they're well produced. And there is nothing funnier or better produced than Dungeons and Daddies right now. And it is not a BDSM podcast. I'm sorry to report, although they do have one BDSM episode that's pretty great. But it is a comedy podcast about 4 dads from our world who get flung into the forgotten realms while they're on their way to soccer practice with their sons, and they realize that they've been really bad dads. And one of the other great things about this podcast, I could talk about it, I think, for an hour, but also, one of the dads is played by a woman. So I'm just saying, it's really great. It's really funny. It's really smart. So if you're feeling a little alone right now and you're caught up all on us, I highly recommend you check out Dungeons and Daddies. It's so fun.
Super. Let's do this. Zoe, let's talk about some tropes that were in this book.
Let's do it. There were less than last book, I think, but still quite a few.
Still definitely a few. I was going through the list and I was like, that one counts. There was a lot of kind of counts.
Yeah, they're not necessarily the main trope, but there's a lot of things that happen in this book that could, like you said, check off a tropes list. She's an orphan, right? She has a tragic backstory because she doesn't have any money and this and, her parents died when she was young and this and that.
She's a bit of a damsel in distress because she broke.
Yeah, she's definitely. And she's shaking her reticule to count the 5 pounds that are last in there. So it's also a slightly forbidden love for sure. They both realize at the beginning that they are not for each other. He says it flat out. He has other plans. She is like, I'm not going to try for you if you don't want me. I don't have time for that.
Yeah. And then, but it's a bit matchmakery because they're trying to, he's trying to help her find a mate, but brings her together, brings her and him closer.
Absolutely. Oh, goodness. Unrequited love for sure.
Because he saw her first.
unrequited, but also it's love at first sight for him. Like,
yes.
It absolutely is. So yeah, it's a lot of things.
Yes. And then we have the marriage of convenience for him.
Yeah, he's about to enter into a marriage of convenience because it'll fund his trip. And then I feel like nerdy scientist who wears glasses but isn't actually nerdy, who's kind of a beefcake after all.
It's so funny how they constantly talk about his scientistness and his glasses, and then they're like, oh, but he's really hot. And I'm like, hot people can have glasses too. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think that that's enough tropes to discuss. I'm sure there's some other little ones in there, but yeah. So what did you think about our hero? What did you think about Miles?
I love Miles. Because I love that he's protective, but he's not overbearing. Like, he's not macho about it, but he does have this internal need to like protect the people that he loves and, you know, help them out. But he also just has that ability with anyone. Like, he wants to help people and he likes people, but he's not overly macho, but he's macho enough.
Yeah, he steps in when needed and he tries to make the people around him better. It's like when he, told Cynthia she sees more, so she has to do better. He didn't yell at her and tell her she was bad. He basically did the I'm disappointed in you because I know you're more.
Yeah. But also too, like when he stands up to his dad, that just shows him like, he's like, no, like I'm a man, like you can't tell me what to do. Like I'm going to do this anyway. But like, this is my expectation of you. And it actually, his father's really impressed with that, but that's just kind of the person he is. He takes his path and he sticks to his path. Yeah.
So if you had to rate him on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put Miles?
I would put him probably like a solid 8.
So I'm going to tell you a couple of things about Miles. I completely agree with all of your feelings about Miles. Miles is absolutely a great hero. He has so many wonderful moments, and you get more than just him with her. You get him being the host. You get him being the scientist. You get him being the brother.
Mm-hmm.
You get him being the son. And you really get a lot about him. And the whole beginning of the book is also from his perspective. So you're immediately starting this book in his eyes, and it's refreshing and it's wonderful, and I'll get more into that later. But there's one quote for him that I really liked. It's when he and Cynthia are discussing the men that she has on offering at this house party, and she's trying to say that they have redeeming qualities. Cynthia's saying, perhaps Ass is strong, don't you think? He can be charming. Any man can be charming given incentive. And at this, Miles froze. He stared at her incredulously. He opened his mouth briefly, closed again, and then he put the quill down so sharply that his hand all but slapped the desk. She flinched. His voice was low and quick and fiercely exasperated. No, Cynthia. Millthorpe is a blusterly rustic. Goodkind is a pompous ass, and Argosy is an unfinished, arrogant twig. Not a one of them is actually charming. It's you. You who make them charming. You spoke of spiderwebs to Goodkind. I'll tell you of chemical reactions. She was taken aback. I beg your pardon? You are the compound that makes them effervesce. You transform them, Cynthia. Your efforts. You listen, you smile, you coax, and you include. Otherwise, these men are precisely as I describe them.
I love that. But I love it too because it perfectly encompasses both of them. Like she's looking for the best in other people and he's like, no, you bring out the best in other people. But it's partly why she has a high rating in my opinion too. But before I talk about her rating, what would you rate Miles?
I think I would rate Miles. I'm waffling between an 8 and a 7.5. And earlier before this recording, when I was thinking about it, I was feeling 7.5. But the more we've discussed this book, I think I want to agree. I think Miles is an 8.
Yeah, I feel like he's real
super solid.
And so Cynthia, like we just said, I really like Cynthia because could very easily be like the vapid woman who meets the scientist and like learns to be kind to others.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But she's not. Like, she's already internally kind. Like, desperation was driving her to be that vapid creature he overheard. And because she wasn't actually being vapid, she just was being realistic.
Yeah. And like we said before, I think it's that kind of child star syndrome, right? She kind of like all of a sudden had everything that she'd never had before. And it carried her away. And it was wonderful in the moment. And so, yes, she's smart and funny and emotionally aware. And she's a great heroine, in my opinion, too.
I would 100% say. For me, though, I would rate her a little lower than Miles. I would say she's a 7. I was a little bit more put off with her just because, like, she's a good, kind person, and she's the kind of person I would love to know. But I felt like she was a little bit too down on herself a bit. Does that make sense? Constantly reprimanding herself, and she wasn't really... I felt like she needed more confidence in herself to keep going.
Yeah, there was something about her to me that didn't quite come together the way Miles did. I still think she's great. I think she's fun. I think that she's very relatable. I think that as a reader, you can see, you can identify with a lot of the things that she goes through. Absolutely. And that she says. So I agree, though. I don't feel like, to me, an 8 is exceptional, right? And I feel like Miles really hits that. I also think, like I said, you get him at the very beginning of the book. You get a little bit more from him. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why maybe he gets a little bit more. But there is a wonderful moment of her, which actually isn't anything she says, but it is after it's after their fight, the Violet running away, and they have some great words, and it comes around from him being mad at her to him kind of understanding. And the author writes, "She knew a peculiar tenderness again and a great satisfaction that she'd robbed the clever man of speech and clarity." And I really loved that. Yeah. You know, where she's having this kind of quiet moment to herself, but she's done something very clever.
Yes. So what's your number?
Oh, a 7.
Okay, cool. I guess we're really equal on this hero-heroine this time around.
We are. So what about your favorite quote? I know I've done a bunch of quotes here, but do you have a favorite one from this one?
Oh my gosh, I had so many favorite ones. I was just looking at them, and I don't even know which one to pick. I have 2 great ones. One that I think is just funny because it's a very serious moment, and like Julianne Long, talking about her writing, she's inserting just a little bit of humor into the situation to kind of break it up. And you'll appreciate this one as well. And all right, here it goes. Behind him, Ramsay whickered. His way of clearing his throat. Ahem. I'm still saddled. Ramsay would have to wait.
Oh, yeah, I did love that moment when she's coming to yell at him about something, and he just stands very still, and he's got his horse saddled behind him, and he asks everybody else to leave, and
they have this huge discussion, and then he's just like, she's just talking about the horse, and as a horse girl, I can appreciate it.
Yep. I did appreciate that as well. Did you have another?
I do. I have one more serious one, and this one is towards the end, and she knows she's not going to spend her life with Miles, and she's reconciling that fact to herself. And so what she says to herself, this is her internal monologue, life was not fair. That's what made it interesting. And she had probably been much luckier in her day than anyone had a right to expect.
Oh, it's very sweet.
It is. And I like it too, because it's very true. Life isn't fair, and sometimes things don't go the way you plan. And, it's heartbreaking that she's like, I have to give him up because, like, I have been so fortunate, and unfortunately, he's not one of those things that I will have for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So my quote is a little bit kind of on the more serious side, but it's something really beautiful. And I would say something I really wanted to mention is I think this book has one of the best intros of any book that I have read. And I'm interested as we go along this podcast to see how this rates. And I'm going to notate it on some spreadsheet somewhere about the intro of this book, because I do think a good intro is very important. But literally the first 15 pages of this book, I had a smile ear to ear on my face.
They were great.
I could not turn the pages fast enough. I was so thrilled and excited, and I was just carted along with this whole thing. And the writing in the beginning is also brilliant. I think she has really hit her stride on this book.
I think so too. She was a lot less rambly this time, and I thought it was just much more concise in characters, and there was good little details, but there weren't crazy details.
Absolutely. And this is towards the end of the book where they have decided, you know, again, that they are not for each other, and he's going to help her get Argosy and get engaged to him. And they're having a moment alone together, and they're in the garden. And the author writes, "They sat in a little pocket of silent surprise, these two people who'd been so certain love was unnecessary when they set out to get what they wanted. How peculiar it was that this moment of realization and total happiness should be indistinguishable from anguish."
Ugh. I just remember that moment so well.
Yeah. Anyhow, as kind of somber as it is, we know that they end up happily ever after. And I even believe that even though we don't get an epilogue, somewhere in one of the other books, we do get some updates about them. So when we hit those in our recap, we will be sure to mention them.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about our encounter counter. What's our number, Zoe?
I think it's 2. Because
I would agree.
2 below the belts, and there's
Woohoo.
1 kiss and 1 fondling. So it's like 2. I mean, 2 is the encounters. Encounters are below the belt. So
yes,
we have 2.
I would agree.
Yeah. And they were pretty steamy. I would say this book is like
steamy.
a solid, I don't know. We need to get some funny, steamy ratings rather than 1 to 10. I'm sure between episode 2 and 3, we can come up with something.
I'm sure.
But we'll definitely workshop it. So feminist recap?
Fairly feminist. I would say it leans into the supporter category.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it avoided a lot of pitfalls that it could have fell into. For example, when Miles was telling Cynthia she could have been better, it could have been so much more condescending, which would have made me feel like it was, you know, an offender, but it wasn't. I would say he is always thinking she is more. I don't think there's really any themes that kind of, you know, hit feminism. I feel like this one's pretty neutral for me.
I feel like Good Kind was the only one that would like offend feminism, but like no one's supporting him. Like everyone thinks he's an ass.
Yeah, and he's just very backwards in a lot of things, and he's kind of in and out of the book.
Yeah, and Cynthia's pretty strong as a female character. You know, she has been rescuing herself her whole life. You know, like the only reason a man is involved is because there has to be, because she has to get married if she's going to have money. It's marry or work. Those are the options. Yeah.
So I think, somewhere between neutral and supporter at this point, which was just like the last one that we read.
Yeah. So she's pretty good on the author. Like, doesn't seriously offend your senses.
Yeah. So last but not least, Kelsey, would you recommend this book?
I would wholeheartedly recommend this book. Like, I don't even think you need to read Colin's book. Like, you can just read this one.
I totally agree. And I know that we talked a lot about the plot here, but I cannot stress how beautiful the first bit of this book is, and how there are just so many little moments throughout this book that are really wonderful and poignant. And I just think that reading it is really rewarding as a reader.
I would agree. And there's also just such good character development, not just through Miles and Cynthia, but also with some of the characters we're only just starting to know. Violet, Jonathan, you know, those are characters that come to play later on. And you totally get to get a more of a feel for them, which is going to make reading their books so much better.
I can't wait. But unfortunately, we don't get to read about Violet or Jonathan next time. Next week, we're going to be continuing on in Pennyroyal Green for now. And our next book is Pennyroyal Green number 3, Since the Surrender.
And hello for the final time, listeners. This episode, that is. I'll, of course, see you next week, and that's what I'm here to talk about. Next week, we are not going to be reading Since the Surrender. We are going to be moving forward and also back to one of our favorite series. We are going to be hanging out with those Bridgertons again because we're reading the 5th book in the Bridgerton series, which is To Sir Philip with Love. And I am so excited to talk about this book, and I cannot wait to bring you our brand new episode next week. So tune in 1 week from today to hear us talk about To Sir Philip with Love by Julia Quinn. And although this isn't usually my line, I feel like I should say, may all your ever afters end happily. Tea and Strumpets is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts.